Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's target training lesson on presentations. This webinar is a series of 3 webinars that we'll be hosting this week to launch our version 9 of Envisioneer. Today's presentation is on presentations, so we're going to be looking at rendering and creating presentation drawings. Tomorrow's class, we're going to be dealing with productivity, and then on Wednesday, we'll be dealing with precision. So I hope you can join us for all 3 webinars. We will be taping the webinars. So we'll be sending you a link to review the webinars at your leisure later on as well. So you'll be able to download the webinar and watch it again. Following the presentation, I'll also email you out a booklet that will cover the information that we did go over in class so you can read about all of the information and follow up and practice using your own models. So for today's class, we're going to be focusing in on presentation. And with the presentation, we're going to be looking at what makes a really good rendering and a presentation drawing using the software. So we'll be talking about lighting, we'll be talking about material choices, we'll be talking about the settings, the new version 9 settings for our new rendering engine. Then we'll look into worksheets and how to insert all of these various types of views onto different worksheets so that you can print them out and present them to a client. Later today, you will be receiving a version 9 download link. We're going to be sending those links out in groups because there's a large amount of people that will be downloading today and upgrading. So you'll be getting it sometime today. If you don't receive the link today, I want you to do one thing first. Check your spam filter just to make sure that the link in the email didn't go there first. If you don't see it in any of your email, any of your spam folders, then contact us at our support center. support@cadsoft.com is our email address, and we'll make sure that one does get out to you. But again, we are timing out the upgrade emails that are going out today, so it'll be sometime today that you receive it. It might even be in later in tonight, depending on how fast the groups go out and get downloaded, so we don't have everyone rushing in and downloading at the same time and bogging down the system. So let's start off on our presentation today about presentation drawings in the software. When you're creating a photorealistic image in the software, you have to have a good understanding of 3 different things in the software. One is materials, because each material that you use in your image, they'll all have background settings to them to say if it's a glossy image or if it's a dull or if it's reflective or transparent. And also with rendering, you also have to understand lighting. So when you insert a light into a room, how that light is going to bounce around the room itself, how bright is that light, how you can use different lights in a space to illuminate the room differently. And then we're going to talk about the settings that are involved. So when we go to produce, we've got a good image, we like the materials we've used, we like the lighting that we have in the space. When we go to produce the rendering, the photorealistic image, there's different settings in there that could either make it a really good image or a really bad image if you don't understand the settings that are involved. So we're going to go through all of those today. The first one I want to go through is talking about materials. So when you're creating your image and creating your walls and your doors and your windows, every time you're inserting one of those various elements, each one of those elements has an image file attached to it. So if I look at this siding, it has a gray image of siding attached to it. Or if we go into the interior of the home, and I'm just going to step inside and go into a kitchen view, the floor has an image file attached to it. The cabinets have image files attached to them, and the wall themselves. So each one of those elements, the wall, the floor, the cabinets, all have image files attached to them. So it looks like tile, and it looks like a wood cabinet or a painted wall. So I'm going to be looking at these elements and changing them for you. First of all, I'm going to take a look at the wall itself here. So I'm just going to select the wall by left-clicking on it. And then I'm going to right-click, because remembering that always in a right-click, you'll reveal options that you have for the object that you've selected. And I'm going to look at the properties of this element. We're going to go right to the appearance page, because this deals with what the element looks like in both 2D and 3D. All of the elements, various different components are listed here on the left. So when we're dealing with what does it look like in 3D, that's when we look at exterior surface, left and right surface. If you want to deal with the line work when you're looking at a plan view, that's when you deal with these 2D elements that you see in the list. So if I'm highlighted right now on exterior surface, I can see that it's using this gray siding material. The material is listed as a property of this wall. So every time I draw this wall, it's going to have this material on the exterior side of the wall. And this gray siding, you can see, has a little button beside it. That button will allow me to pick on it and change the material that I might want to use. So I can do that for each side of the wall. So if I go to the left and holding down my Shift key, the right side, if I want to change them at the same time, it'll select both of them. I can see right now that it's using a drywall material, and this is the image that it's going to have. So if I want to change that material, I would simply come here and click on this button. That will take me out into my materials catalog. The material catalog houses all different JPEGs and bitmap images of different and various materials that you can use in your model so that when you're drawing it'll appear like that particular material. So if you're dressing out a room and you want to use a specific paint color or a siding product, then you can add in a JPEG or a bitmap to look like it. So I'm going to scroll down in the top here under my groups. The groups organize all the various elements. So we have landscape backgrounds, miscellaneous, there's metal products. So we put them all into different folders. I'm going to come into this Benjamin Moore paint color trends folder, and I'm going to be adding in a new material because I want to show you that if you want to add in a new material, how you do that. So I've gotten a paint chip from Benjamin Moore, and I want to add it into this folder of Benjamin Moore paints. So I'm highlighted on the group I want to add to it, and then down below I'll see all the various paints that I have there already. To add a new one in, I simply right-click in this material list. That'll give me the opportunity to add in a new material, edit the one that I'm currently highlighted on, or if I don't want to use a material any longer, I can delete it out. So I'm going to choose Add Material to add in a new material. The first thing I need to do is to give it a name. I want to give this new paint color a name so that when I'm looking at it in my catalog, I'll easily find it. I'm going to call it Ashley Gray, which is a new paint color available with Benjamin Moore. I can either use a solid color, and when I click solid color, it allows me to go out and just pick a color, any number of colors that my graphics card can handle and create just from using a simple color. So when you use color, it's just giving you a basic color right from your Windows system basic colors that you have available. When you want to use a very specific JPEG image of a piece of siding or of a paint chip that you've gotten from Benjamin Moore, then you don't use solid color. You use the other option, use a texture. And when you use a texture, this allows you to hit the select button, go out onto your hard drive, and you can find either JPEGs or bitmaps. So I'm going to hit on the select button, and I'm going to go out to my desktop where I've saved the Ashley Gray paint sample from Benjamin Moore. So here you can see I have the Ashley Gray paint, and it's here as a JPEG. Down in the lower right corner, you can see you can change your files of type. So I could change that to be a bitmap, a JPEG, or a Targa that you might download from a website of your particular manufacturer, or it could even be a digital picture that you take. Any JPEG, bitmap, and Targa are valid to be inserted into the software and used as a texture. Now I say that, but I would always prefer all of you to use JPEGs. The reason I want you to use a JPEG is it's a smaller file size, usually than a bitmap or a Targa. And if you're going to be loading in lots of new custom textures to use with the software, you want to make sure that you keep them as a small file size as possible, but still have a good image. And JPEGs will do that for you. They'll be a smaller file size than a bitmap, but they'll still look good. JPEGs are what you typically use on a website when you're adding different new textures and materials in and image files onto a website. They use JPEGs because they load quicker. Bitmaps are typically used if you're going to print something out. They have the pixels that are used to create that image are tighter together, and because they're tighter together and then therefore more pixels, it's a larger file size. JPEGs are put together more loosely, but they still give you a good image file, especially when it's just a paint texture that you're using or a different texture. So always try to use a JPEG because they're smaller. So I'm going to choose my Ashley Gray Paint JPEG that I found on the internet on the Benjamin Moore website, and I'm going to click Open. Now on my Materials Properties page, I've given it a name at the top, and it's using the texture of the Ashley Gray Paint JPEG that I found on the internet. You can give it a very specific height for the tile. What we call these image files are tiles, because when we apply this paint color to the wall, it's actually tiling it across the wall, meaning that as I go across this wall, it's going to take this image, and it might be this size, and it's going to repeat it all the way across in the same size. So all of it is going to be tiled across the wall to create an even look of the same paint all the way across. Even though this tile is only 3 feet by 3 feet, it's going to repeat it all the way across the wall as many times as it can to fill in that wall with that same image. So if you're taking a picture or downloading a picture of tile or brick or something that has a very repeatable pattern in it, you want to make sure you've got this tile height matching the size of that image. So if you take a picture of a piece of siding and you take a picture that's 1 foot by 1 foot, make sure you match that in here. If you change it to be 3 foot by 3 foot, you could all of a sudden have a siding board that's much bigger than what you want. It could be an 8-inch board, but because you've stretched out this tile height and width, it could look like it's 16 inches. Or if you make it smaller, it could look like a 4-inch board. Down below that, what we want to skip down to are these rendering effects. So when I take this image, this picture of this tile, I want to have effects behind it so that it knows if it's glossy, or if it's a dull finish, or if it's transparent like a piece of glass. And that's what we take down here under these rendering effects. With the rendering effects, we have presets to make it easier for you. So if you know it's a paint color and you want it to be a dull, flat paint, then you could go to dull or semi-gloss or high gloss. Liquid would make it look very transparent and very glossy look to it. You can also click right here and say you want to display the setting details. And when you do that, it gives you the opportunity to come down and play with them yourself. So let's discuss the difference between specular, emissive, and transparency on a particular material. So when I'm looking at this Ashley Gray paint, if I move up the specular value here, that means I'm going to make it, in effect, glossy, give it a glossy finish. The highest you want to make a glossy finish is about 15%. If you go any higher than that, then it becomes very, very too glossy, almost liquid in the appearance of it, and it overcomes the whole rendering effect. Everyone wants to give it that glossy, clean look to an image, but if I have glossy tile and I put really glossy cabinets on and I have a glossy paint, everything looks really glossy and liquidy. So I always recommend when you're creating a rendering, pick one focal element in the rendering, whether you want to profile the cabinetry or the tile work on the floor, and make it your glossy element at about 15%. And everything else, back it off to about 5% or 10%, so everything doesn't look too glossy, and it really degrades the overall look of the image if everything is too glossy. But something like our paint, I would leave it down at 0 because it's a flat base paint. If it's a glossy finish, give it about a 2% on your walls, nothing higher. You don't want it to be too glossy. If a texture is emissive, that means that it's going to emit light from it. So you'd really only want to give an emissive value to things like lampshade covers. So it looks like that lamp and the shade is emitting light from it. Things like our paint for our wall, we want to keep that at 0. We don't want it to emit any light from it. But if you are creating lampshades or something like that and you want it to look like it's emitting light, then you would give it an emissive value. Sometimes you might even want to give that a little bit of that to your window glass, just so it looks like light's coming through. The sun study will do that as well, but if you wanted to turn off the sun and just give an emissive value to the glass, it can do that too. The last effect you can have is transparency. So if it's 100% transparency like our window glass, you're going to be able to see right through it. But if it's something that you wanted to give a slightly transparent look, like something like glass block as an example, or a fabric, like a sheer fabric on a window covering, you might want to back that down to 46%. So they'll be able to see through that material. But something, again, like our paint, our new Ashley Gray paint, then I'm going to bring that transparency down to 0%. So it's a nice solid, and you won't be able to see through it. Every material that's in the software that's used on our various elements has material properties set to it for specular, emissive, and transparency. So if you're finding that when you're rendering a room and you don't like the way that a particular material looks, check the material properties for it by coming into this dialog box and changing the specular value. Maybe it's too glossy, maybe it's not glossy enough. Change that specular. If it's a lampshade and you want to give it that emissive look, up or down. The other rendering effect, and which is new in version 9, is this one that I'm going to circle around, this texture intensity. When you're taking a picture, a digital picture of a new material, or you download one from the internet, it might have a slight brightness to it. If it's too bright, maybe you took the picture of the siding on a bright sunny day and it's kind of washing out the image itself of the siding or the brick. You might want to back off this image intensity and bring it down to almost a negative value. Or if you took it and it seems really dark, you might want to increase the texture intensity so that it looks like a brighter file. You could almost think of this as when you're taking a picture with your camera that you'd add a flash to it. So this is almost like a flash. You're either dulling it down or you're increasing the flash so that that material doesn't look too washed out or too dark. You can increase the intensity of that texture. And this is a brand new rendering effect that we have in version 9. So you can take advantage of that. So now that I have all of my material properties set, I can click OK, and I now have this new material in my materials catalog. That new material, Ashley Gray, will be there forever. It's part of my catalog now, so anytime I start up a new project, it'll always be there for me. So when I click OK now, I'm applying that to our left and our right side of that back wall. And I simply then just click OK. It updates that back wall in our file, and you can see that now it's the same property. It's got that gray look to it. What if I wanted to apply that to all of my interior walls? Up here in the upper left-hand corner of the screen, I'm highlighted now on the material paintbrush. By clicking on this material paintbrush, when you're in a 3D view, it'll bring up the materials catalog on the right-hand side where you usually have your catalog. So now it'll be filled with different materials that I can choose from. If I want to select a material and find out what it is, that's when I would use this eyedropper. This eyedropper right here allows me to take a sample of a material that's part of my project. So I'm going to click on that eyedropper and take a sample of our new Ashley Gray. You'll notice in my catalog, it then updates and shows me Ashley Gray and where it's being stored. If I want to apply that to an element, I then click on this Materials Applicator, the little button that looks like a paintbrush. If I want it to apply to all of my walls, all at the same time, then I put this little check-in beside Apply to All Similar. That'll apply the same paint color to all of my walls, all at the same time. So I hit my material paintbrush, and I click on a wall, and every wall that's the exact same wall will then be painted that same color. So it's a quick way of applying a new paint color to all of my walls in a room. So now we've talked about materials. Material properties for individual materials, adding in a new material. So you could do the exact same for your flooring materials, your walls, the cabinets. They're all just image files. You can import a new image file, apply those material properties to it, and then apply it to the scene using our material paintbrush. The next thing I want to talk about as far as rendering is when we're looking at lighting, because lighting has a huge role in creating a really good rendering. So I'm just going to take this ceiling fan that we have in this space, and I'm going to double click on it to bring up its properties. When I'm looking at a light, and I want to look at the light that it's projecting into the space, that's when I'm going to go to this Lights tab in the Lighting dialog box. So when I'm looking at this light, we have various settings in here. See this brightness percentage? Think of that like a dimmer. I can dim this light if I want to. So if I'm finding it too bright, I can dim down this 75-watt bulb and bring down its intensity. If I want something different than a 75-watt bulb, that's when I can hit this Edit button. And when I hit this Edit button, it'll take me into a list of different light sources that I can use. So if I wanted to change that down to a 40-watt bulb or a 60-watt bulb, I can do that. You'll also notice with all of these different light sources that are here, I'm going to right-click on it. And by right-clicking, it'll allow me to add in a new light or edit it. I'm going to edit this light source, this 75-watt bulb. And in here, you can see that you can even provide a color for it. I recommend trying to keep the color set to white, because then it'll show you the true colors that you're using for all of your materials. If I have a color associated to it, like that warm peach tone that was there originally, that'll cast a nice warm light into the space, it can also play with the colors in my scene. So when I'm putting that peach tone on this gray, it can actually cause like a peach color on the scene, which gives it that nice warm feel. But if you want to show the exact colors, you might want to just set that to a white. So you again select your light source, and you can add in as many light sources. So if it's a multi-bulbed light, you can add as many different lights into it that you need to. Just by hitting on this Add button, it'll add in further lights to this lighting unit that we have, this ceiling fan. The important thing to remember about the lights is the light's position. Over in the preview here of my light, you can see that there's a little red dot. That little red dot is where the light is going to be cast out of that particular lighting unit. So you can see that it's got a Z or a Z value there of -5 inches. So 5 inches away from my light unit, I'm going to start casting down the light. The reason that we have a negative value set there and that the light is actually sitting lower than the actual fixture is that you don't want the light to be right inside the fixture, because if the light is right inside the fixture, it's going to try to cast out of the fixture, and it's going to be lost sitting inside that unit. It won't be able to cast outside of the unit itself. So you set it down lower so that it can actually cast out the light. You don't want it to be caught inside the lighting element itself. Also, this lighting orientation, you can play with these, and this is new in version 9. The lighting itself can either be tilted one direction or another. So if I click on here, tilt up or down or left and right, you can see I can put a degrees to it. So I can say it's 45 degrees, and see how the lighting image itself is going to change. Now we have the light going off in one direction on a 45-degree slant. Or I can keep it coming straight down. So you can play with these various lights. If you had multiple lights, you could have multiple lights going in multiple directions coming down from that one unit. So if you're wanting to play with the lights, you can affect these different light sources casting down. So I'm going to keep mine right at 0 degrees for our image today. So lighting is important because when you're adding it into the space, you remember that you have the lighting colors, that you can edit the light source and change the color of that light. You can see where it's being cast down from. So ours is going to start here and cast down straight, but I can also have it coming down from an angle. When you're creating a rendering, you want to make sure that it's not pointing right up, or it could create what we call like a burn mark on the ceiling, where it's a really light, intense light right up on that ceiling, and it almost looks like the ceiling's burnt in that intensity of that light. So you always want to make sure that your lighting is at least pointing down. And you can change that in your lighting orientation. So lighting plays that dramatic role because as you're creating that light in the space, it's going to bounce off the material. So if I just click OK here to accept the light that we have and all of the different settings, this light in our scene, our ceiling fan, is going to cast light down. When it hits this floor, in the material properties of this floor, if it's a specular material, if it's glossy, then that's going to bounce up and also start to play off all the other materials. So maybe it'll bounce off this cabinet. And if it has a glossy finish, well, it's going to bounce back down, and then it's going to bounce up onto our walls that might have a dull finish. So this light is constantly being cast up and redirected as it hits different materials. And if they are a specular material, that'll cause them a new light to be bounced up and off another object. So lighting materials work hand in hand there as you're casting down that light and it hits a material, how it's going to bounce off or be absorbed into a material if it's a dull finish. If it doesn't have that specular, as a zero specular, it's just going to absorb that light. And just like our ceiling here, you can see it's already absorbing some light. The lighting in the room, the materials in the room, they all take effect when we start to render the room itself. And when we start to render the room, you have different rendering settings that are going to take effect. So we're going to talk about those rendering settings now. So I'm going to go up to the View pull-down menu, and I'm going to choose Render 3D Real View. And the Render 3D Real View process is what's going to take this room, the materials that I've used, the lights that I've used, and create and look at it as a photorealistic image. So it's going to take on more realistic material properties and make it look photorealistic. So again, it's View, Render 3D Real View. When I get into the Render 3D Real View dialog box, it's going to give me a preview of my rendering here to the right. So this is the scene that I'm going to be looking at. If I want to change that scene, then I can look down below the scene, and you'll see that we have our different ways of navigating around that scene are here. So I can walk backwards by clicking on the feet, pulling down if I want to look further into the scene, or I can walk straight ahead if I want to get more into the scene itself. So it allows you to walk around a space, to view the space, and change the angle that you're on. I can have this look around and perhaps change where I'm looking in a scene. The rendering itself has lots of different options depending on how you're going to render. And you can see those options down here in the lower left-hand corner of this dialog box. I'm just circling around that Options button. So by clicking on this Options button, it'll bring up various rendering options that I have. The first one that you see here in the list is New with version 9. This will do a system check. Basically what it's doing is looking at the video card that you have in your system and checking to make sure that you have a driver that's capable of doing the real view settings. So you'll want to make sure you do that system check to make sure that you have the latest driver for your video card and you're using the one that the system was going to recommend that you use so it can render properly. So everyone, when you first get version 9, should do that system check just to make sure that you have the latest driver that it recommends to do rendering. Below that, you get into your ray trace quality. So what a rendering is that when you create a photorealistic image, it's going to look at the lights that you have in the space. And it's going to cast down lighting from those lighting units that you've put into the room. It's going to cast down rays of light. And those rays of light are going to hit the various materials in the room. And as it hits the material, it's going to evaluate that material to say, is that a glossy finish? Is it a dull finish? So is it going to reflect the light? Is it going to absorb the light? And go through. So we have various levels so that as it's casting the light into the space, A more higher level of rendering is going to cast down more lights in the space, and a low level is going to cast down not as many lights into the space from one element so that it can produce it faster. Because you can see the higher level is going to be slower. It's going to cast down more light rays from one light source than a low level will. Level 1 also has no skylight. So it's without direction and gives, what a skylight is it gives more light to an overall space and an overall scene. So when you get into our higher levels of rendering, they'll have what we call a skylight, which is new in version 9, and that skylight is going to give an overall higher level of light to an overall scene. Level 1 does not include that skylight, so it's just going to have the lighting is going to be very dependent on the lights that you insert into the space. The shadows are also going to get more realistic the higher that you go. Level 1 will almost even give a black shadow in an area, where when you get up to highest level, level 5, it'll be a better shadow, and it will have less what we call noise. So when we have light coming in from the sunlight outside a room that might be casting in through a window, and it's interacting with lights like our ceiling fan in our room, it can cause what we call noise in the space. And I'm going to bring up an image so I can profile what noise is to you. So on my screen right now, you're going to see a rendering that I created in version 9. So you can see in this rendering, you have the really nice reflective quality in the floor. You can see the windows, the highlights there going on the floor, and you get this glossy look on this cabinet in this corner here. But what I want to profile to you is this corner right here. I didn't do the highest level of rendering, and you can see how you've got little spots and speckles. That's what we call noise. So if you like that appearance of it coming through and giving that speckled look, then you'd have a lesser value in your rendering, a level 1 or 2 or 3. Level 4 and 5 are going to try to diminish that noise, that speckle look, but it's going to take longer to do that. So the lower values will have that more noise value to it, but they're going to produce much quicker. So if you have an image that you want to create very quickly for a client, they're going to be walking in your door any minute, you can get a nice looking image, photorealistic image like the one I have in the scene, but you might have a little bit of noise occurring if you're on a lower value like I did in a level 2. So this is a level 2 rendering. Still looks good, but you get a little bit of noise there from the light coming in. So I'm going to go back into our settings here that we have in Envisioneer and take away that image that I brought up. So the higher that you get, the less noise that you're going to have as well. The next term that I want to bring attention to is this anti-aliasing. This is something that we've had all along, but what's new in version 9 is that it goes all the way up to a level 5 of anti-aliasing. When you're producing an image, a 3D image, you might get what we call jagged edges. So if we look out at my image right now that I haven't rendered out here, I want to draw your attention to the window trim, the top of the cabinets, along this edge of this countertop here. See how the lines look a little bit jagged as they're being drawn? They're not straight. Your video card will have a degree of difficulty producing a straight edge line in a 3D view. So what anti-aliasing does is it helps and works with your video card to straighten out those jagged edges. So I recommend bringing that up to a level 5 for your final produced image. When you're creating photorealistic images in the software, you should do it in stages before you hit a level 5. So if you just created a really good model and you want to create a nice rendering to send to a client, the last thing that I recommend that you do is come in here and set this up to highest level 5, bump up the anti-aliasing to 5, and produce the image right off the bat, because you could be wasting your time. Highest level, you know, is going to be slower. When you add in anti-aliasing, again, it's going to be slower. So it could take quite a while to produce that rendering. And all of that to find out that, oh no, I forgot to put a specular value on the floor. It's not glossy, it's dull. you've just wasted time. So what we do here at CADSoft, when we're producing images for our website or going to trade shows on our bulletin boards, you might have seen them on our website, or if you've met us at a trade show, all of the photorealistic images that we create, we always start out at a low level, level 2, with anti-aliasing set down, knowing that when we do our final image, we'll bring that up and straighten out those edges. We do it at these lower levels to begin with, so we can first test out the image to make sure that, yeah, we do have all of the material set correctly. I like the way the light's producing on this image. It's not too harsh, or I need more light in the space. I might want to add in another image. By producing those initial images at a lower value, you're going to save yourself some time because you can correct those and then go to that higher level of 5, and set that anti-aliasing up to 5 as well. If you remember when we were looking at the light file itself, when I was looking at the properties of the ceiling fan, I went right in and I changed that color. That light itself can come from what we call an IES file. So an IES file is produced by lighting manufacturers so that you can see how a light is going to illuminate in a space. And we use those in Envisioneer. So someone like GE would produce an IES file, and you can download IES files from their website. So you can see exactly how that bulb is going to emit light. The software itself is intelligent enough to know how each light is going to emit as well. So if you want it to go have a faster rendering, you can tell it to ignore the IES files. So it's just going to look at its own settings for lighting and produce the lighting for that particular light fixture. So it knows you have a 75-foot bulb. It'll work with it and ignore all of the different information that might be stored with that IES file, because that IES file might have reams and reams of data attached to it that it has to filter through and read while it's doing that rendering. So if you want to speed up the whole process, you can tell it to ignore all of that and just use the lighting that Envisioneer puts with a light and use it instead, which most of the time, 90% of the time you can do, unless you want a particular light and you would want to use that IES file. So we talked about ray tracing the scene, casting down that light, and giving it that photorealistic image. Now we want to talk about the environment. So the environment is about the daylight and the overall scene that you're working with. So when it's looking at the daylight, by default, this is going to be checked, and it's going to be included in that calculation, even for indoor scenes. So light can't come through a window. And you can turn off daylight if you want. And this will basically omit the daylight from filtering in through that window and stop it from being in the calculation. So it will speed up the rendering process. So if you tell it to ignore the daylight, it'll turn it off, and it only has to worry about that one light in the scene when it's casting down all those shades and shadows, and it's looking at all of the different materials and how light from a window could basically come in and bounce off the space. Okay, so this is a, you can enable it or disable it here. And when you do enable it, then you want to talk about the light coming in through the windows. What type of day is it? You can get that exact, that you can tell it it's a clear sky, or you can tell it it's partly cloudy or overcast, so it'll filter through that light as it comes through and goes and brings it through the windows itself. So it can get that exact of how it's rendering that scene, and that light is coming through that window and starting to play with the materials and how it's going to filter through. You'll also notice here that we have a separate option here for noise reduction. So noise, again, is those little pixels, those little dots as it brings in that daylight. I recommend keeping your noise reduction here at 10 for your initial renderings that you're going to do at that medium, moderate speed rendering. But when you want to get into a high level rendering, you might want to bring that up to 20 or 25 so that it gets really perfected and you don't see those individual pixels. But again, the more noise reduction that you do, the slower it's going to get. So when you're doing those first initial renderings, you're going to want to bring that down to about 10, knowing that they're going to disappear in your final rendering if you bounce up that noise reduction. There is noise reduction happening in the highest level of 5 that can happen. And remember that the higher you get, the shadows get better, and the noise reduction gets better as well. But you could keep it on a medium level, get some really good shadows, and then bounce up this noise reduction and to about 25, and still get a high-level rendering that's not going to take as long. So it's not going to try to roll in the noise reduction and the shadows at the same time. It's going to do it separately here, and you still get a nice rendering. So you have your sky and your noise reduction. Underneath that, you'll see that we have these backgrounds. So you can have now in version 9 a background color, or it can use an image. So this is looking out in the background of your entire model. So it could be that blue sky. So when you first go into 3D and you're in exterior rendering, you've got that blue sky, or maybe you've brought in your own custom JPEG and it's a wooded forest or an image that you took of where that scene is going to occur. You can use that background image, the one that's already part of your file. You can't come in through right now and change it at this point, but you could change it to a background color. So if you just wanted it to have a gray or a white background, you can do that here. And when we're using that background, we can tell it to use either a static background or a scaled dynamic background. And if you're using a static background, it enables a constant background brightness. But if you use a scaled dynamic background, it's going to go through that rendering process. So how bright the sun is how bright that background image is going to get as well. So when you use a static background, it's going to take on the intensity of the original image. So as you ray trace the scene, it's not going to put on that lighting on that background image as well. It's going to keep it at that same intensity. So you'll notice this difference, and I recommend for everyone you play with these values, because the more you play with them, and you'll start to realize what they do. So have it at one time, use a static background, and you'll notice that that blue sky stays the same blue sky as it did when you go out to a 3D view. If you use a scaled dynamic background and scale the intensity here, this will affect the degree to which the background brightness is allowed to adjust when you're using it and you're rendering it. So if you find that it's getting too washed out, you might want to go back to use this static background, or you can scale down that intensity of how much it's going to get brightened up when you do the rendering process. So just to recap all of these settings, because they do play an integral part of creating a really good rendering. First thing I want everyone to do is do a system check. Make sure that your computer, your video card, has the latest driver, and that driver can handle the rendering. It'll do a check, and it'll tell you if it can handle it or not. Then you're going to choose your level. If this is your very first rendering of a scene, I recommend doing a level 2 so that you can first evaluate what the scene looks like as it's rendered, and then get into a higher level that's going to have better looking shadows and have less noise than the levels above it. But again, do the low level one first just to make sure the scene is correct. The higher the level, the slower it's going to take, but the more photorealistic it's going to appear. It's going to have better looking shadows. It's going to have less noise. Remember, noise, little pixels of how the light intersperses with each other when it's coming from daylight into the lights you might have in a scene. So with that, we also have our anti-aliasing. Remember that straightens out the jagged edges along a particular material, because every video card is going to have a degree of difficulty producing an exact straight line in a 3D view. This will help straighten them out. Your initial renderings that you're going to create, you're going to keep that at a very low level. And then as you produce more renderings for that particular scene, and you're doing your final rendering, that's when you're going to pump it up to version level 5 there, so that it can create a nice straight line. But it's really not needed until you get to that final rendering. To produce a faster rendering, remember to ignore the IES lighting settings, because there might be quite a few attached to an IES file. We can just use our own internal lighting and do that for it. Remember to enable the daylight if you want to take advantage of it, the sky, And because daylight's coming through that window, there could be some noise of where that daylight hits the lighting that's in a scene. So you're going to want to keep it initially at about 10, but then for your final rendering, you might even want to bring that up to about 25 to reduce that noise, that pixeled look to it. So I'm going to apply these rendering settings to our scene and click OK. And then I'm going to start the rendering process. So when I hit start here on the rendering process, it's going to take my scene that I have here and it's going to start to rendering it. And that rendering, again, depending on how much information I have in my model, is it a big model? Is there lots of rooms? Is there lots of lights? It could take quite a while for it to pound through and create that rendering. Even at a lower level, if you've got a very large model with a lot of detail, it can take some time to do that. So one recommendation I have for reducing the time it takes to produce a rendering is I would recommend that you gut the model. And by gutting, I mean that if you're doing a interior rendering, that you take away all the landscape features that you might have, so that anything that's not inside that room at that particular time, you delete it. Now, when I say that, I would first want you to make a copy of your model. Don't go in and start deleting things and then realize it didn't autosave and you've lost all of those elements forever. You are going to go up to File and Save As. Save a copy of your file. So if this was my model right now is called Presentation Training Model. I would call it Presentation Training Model for rendering the kitchen. Got everything else, so it doesn't have to look at all of those other elements that might be part of the scene or casting a light into the scene. It's a smaller file size, and it will create that for you. Now, as you can see, as it's going through this rendering process, it's slowly revealing the image to you. And as it's slowly revealing the image to you, what you can see is that you can change these different elements here, like brightness. As it's producing the rendering, I can play with this brightness effect, so I can brighten up the space. So if you went all the way through and created this rendering and then realized, oh, it's too dark and I have to change some different lighting effects, you can play with this now in version 9 as you're going through and increasing that brightness effect. If you find that a light is too intense on a ceiling or it's too intense on the floor, that's what we call a burn. And you might want to take away the burning effect by bringing down the value or increasing the burn value here so it takes away that burn. Okay, so this happens as you're creating that rendering. You have the ability to change through and make it brighter, decrease the burning that might be happening. And as it creates that rendering, it's slowly going to reveal it for you. So it's going to go through 2 passes, passing through the lights, and then the second pass is going to take those lights and do the ray tracing effect with it and the global illumination of all the lights that are part of that scene and bring them all together for you. So that's what's going to take some time in that whole process, looking at all the materials, looking at the lights, and as it's going through that, you're changing the brightness and the burn effect of all of it at the same time. So today, working over the internet, with all of you watching, it's slowing down my system to begin with, and it's going to slow it down again because I'm doing this rendering process. So what might be a quicker rendering process, usually that when I don't have everyone in the background, this might take, 5 minutes, 2 minutes, but with everyone in the background, right now it's telling me that it could take up to an hour to produce it because I'm slowing down my system because I have everybody viewing this from all over. It would slow down my system dramatically as well. In version 9 as well, I'm going to highlight some other things to you in our options here. When it's finished the image, so this brightness and burn can happen while it's producing the image and when it's done. And these 2 options here that you see at the bottom here can happen after it's done. So after it's produced this photorealistic image, I can then tell it to convert it to a grayscale. And by converting it to a grayscale, what it's going to do is take this image and make it look like a black and white photograph. So you can check that you want it to convert it to a grayscale, and then when you hit save, it'll save it as a black and white image. You can also check apply a static background. And by applying that static background then, remember we had the difference between a static background and a dynamic background. Well, if you did the dynamic background and found it was a little too bright, a little too intense, you can then check this static background and it'll take the original image file and apply it to the background for you. Then what you can do is hit the Save button and save it as a JPEG, a bitmap, or a target file. And you can send those out to your clients, attach them to an email, or you can put them up on your website to show the image of that room that you're producing. What if you're not happy with it? What if it's one that you know, I don't want to save that, that's not an image that I'm happy with, it was just one that I was using as a production file to see the materials in the room and how they're going to interact with the light, I don't want to save it, then you just hit this reset button and it'll allow you to recreate another rendering right away again. This progress and cancel will go into the produce rendering again, where you would want to go through and click through and create that rendering. So when we're creating a rendering, remembering the things that are important. 3 things that are important for a good rendering. The material choices that you make, the lighting that you choose, either direct lighting from an object or coming in from a light, and then the rendering settings that we just covered. Understanding those 3 things, materials, lighting, and rendering settings, will help you to produce a really good rendering. If you don't understand or don't produce high-level materials, lighting, or settings, then your images aren't going to look as crisp and nice as the ones that we have up on our website. Just on Friday, I created a new part of our forum on our website, our support forum, where you can post questions. There is now a new gallery section. So as you produce your different photorealistic renderings, you can put those up onto our website and show everyone else the quality of renderings that you're able to produce. You'll notice now in version 9, the quality of the renderings that you're going to be able to produce are dramatically better than what they were in version 8. The way it handles the lighting and the materials and the rendering settings is much more efficient, and it'll give you a much better finished quality image. I'm going to be hitting cancel on this ray trace because it's going to take a little bit longer to produce, and I want to continue on with how to produce even further presentation drawings that you can handle out to a client. So we've talked about rendering now. How do I get those out onto a working drawing set of paper so I can produce maybe a floor plan and renderings, so I can send them out as maybe a sales sheet to a client or as a presentation board that I want to show to them. So I'm just going to click cancel on my rendering here, and then I'm going to hit close to end that rendering process. So as soon as you hit cancel now, before in version 8, it took it a while to chug through and do the cancel process. Now it's an instantaneous cancel, and it's done. And then I'm just going to hit close here to exit out of that dialog box. So I produced this model, and now what I want to do is create some sales sheets so that I can send them out to potential clients so that might want to order this particular model of this home. So I'm going to put it into a 2D plan view. And I want to talk about how to get this solid fill look into your wall. So you can see that my walls look nicely darkened in with black ink. How do I get that appearance on the walls themselves so that when I'm producing those presentation drawings, it can have that look to them? You want them to have that solid fill appearance to them because it's easier for clients to understand. When the typical homeowner is looking at a set of floor plans, elevations, and renderings, it's easier for them to understand when it's darkened in with ink. The more lines that you have on a drawing means there's more chance for them to get confused of what a line might represent. But when it's nicely darkened in like that, they get the idea that those are walls that they're looking at. You have universal symbols for doors and windows too that they'll recognize. But you want to make it as simple as possible and have as less information on your presentation floor plan so that they can understand them. One thing that's very important to them too is the labeling of the rooms. So when you put a label in here and say that this is kitchen, this is office, living room, dining room, then they can start to, again, understand the space. Without those labels, sometimes it's hard for them to understand the room. Also hard, very difficult actually, for the average homeowner to understand is the size of the rooms just by looking at this floor plan. It might be a big shock for them to understand that this room is actually 12 by 11 feet. In their mind, looking at this image, they might think that it's 14, 16 feet by 14 feet. So you should also try to maybe even label them with the actual size of the room. And we have options that'll do that automatically for you. So I'm going to talk about next how to label the rooms with their sizes and how to darken in the walls. So I'm just going to zoom in nice and tight on our floor plan here. And I'm going to come up to our Tools pull-down menu. And I'm going to go to Dimensions. And in Dimensions, you'll see that we have a Room Dimensions tool. So Tools, Dimensions, Room Dimensions. This tool will allow me to pick the width and the length of the room itself. I want to draw everybody's attention down to the lower left-hand corner of my screen, where we have what we call our command prompt. The command prompt is always there in every tool that you use, and it's going to be telling you what to do next. So if you've never looked down there in a command before, it can be quite useful, especially when you're using a tool for the very first time and you don't know how to use it. Always look down at that command prompt because it's going to prompt you what to do next. So right now it's prompting me to pick the first corner of the room that I want to put a dimension into. So I'm going to pick in this lower left corner of this dining room, the room with the French doors coming in, the patio doors. So I'm picking in that lower left corner. Left click once. Now it tells me it wants me to indicate the width and the rotation of the room. I can do that in two manners. I can move my cursor across the room and pick in that lower left-hand corner, or you can see that I can also type in the distance and the direction that I want it to go. Very important if you're going to be picking distance and direction is ortho. See how I can move my cursor in any angle right now? So I could be off by a degree when I go to pick on that corner. If I turn ortho on, it's going to restrict my cursor to go into straight directions. So I'm going to be going straight across 360 degrees. So I left click right there. Then I'm moving my cursor up across the room, and I'm showing it the length of the room. And I left click. Again, I could have typed in a value there for the length and the width. When I've indicated by picking points, those 2 points, or I could have typed in the values, this room's dimensions dialog box is going to pop up. And it wants to know the text that I want to type in. I could either go width times length or length times width. And I can also backspace out the text. So if I just wanted to type in 12 feet by 11 feet and give just a generic dimension for that room, not into the very specific, fractions of an inch, I can backspace that out. So it's just going to label it as 12 foot by 11 foot. Then it wants to know the height and the style of the text that I want to use for that room dimension. And that's when I have this text style button here, which is telling me right now that I'm using a dimension style. So I'm going to click on that dimensions style, text style button, and that'll take me into this dialog box where I can change it to any size and style of text that I already have set up. I'm going to keep it at the dimensions, but you can see if I double click on that, it's going to bring it in at about 1/8 of an inch. It's using our CADSoft hand font style, and it's going to put it in at a red color. So I can even click on that red color and tell it that I want it to be just black and click OK. So I've updated that text style. It's still an 1/8 of an inch tall. It's still our hand font, but the color has been changed. And then I click OK, and it'll now use that new updated dimensions text style when it goes to label this room. All I have to do at this point is click OK, and you can see right in the middle of that room, it's now reporting that it's 12 feet by 11 feet. This is what we call a continuous command. My cursor right now is set and ready to dimension the next room. So I would take myself down to the next room, pick in a corner, pick across the room, pick up into the room for the length and the width, label it how I'd want to. So if I want to get rid of all the inches and just go right to feet to simplify the dimension, because remember, the more you simplify it, the easier it is for the average homeowner to understand. Click OK, and it'll be labeled as well. If I also want to label the room with a name of that room, I can add text to these rooms. So I'm going to go up to the Tools pull-down menu. I'm going to choose Text, and I'm going to choose the Text tool. So it's Tools, Text, Text. In here, I can type in any text that I want to. Or you'll notice in our text dialog box, over to the right-hand side, that we have predefined text labels for you. So you'll see the word dining room. You'll see the word kitchen. You'll see the word living room. We type them out for you to help save you some time. So all I have to do is double-click on the word dining room, and dining room gets added. I'm going to highlight the word dining room right now because I want to change its text style. Right now it's on dimension style text, the same as the size of the room label that we put in already. I want to have a larger style and size of text, so I'm going to change it to the label style of text. I'm double-clicking on labels. You can see it's going to be 1/4 of an inch tall, whereas our dimension was only an 1/8. So I'm going to change it as well to be black text, so everything stays nice and dark. And I click OK. Now dining room has that dining room label. So with dining room here, ready to be inserted, I'm first going to check this multiple text insert option. By checking it, as soon as I put the word dining room in the dining room, this dialog box will pop right back up again and allow me to type in another room name. If I don't check that multiple text insert, it's a one-time command, meaning as soon as I insert the text command is over, and I'd have to go back up to Tools, Text, Text to be able to insert text again. So with multiple text insert selected, I click OK, and I put the word dining room in the dining room. The dialog box pops right back up again, and this time I'm going to use the word living room. I'm going to uncheck multiple text insert because this is the last string of text that I'm going to put in for our examples. And then I simply click OK. And I put the word living room in the living room. So you want to label the rooms and put the sizes in there so clients can understand the space and the size that they're looking at. Next, I want to talk about how to darken in these walls. I'm going to double click on this exterior wall. And when I double click on a wall or any element in your model, it'll bring up its properties. So I have now the walls dialog box in front of me. I want to look at the appearance of that wall. Remember we talked about the components of the wall. We looked at changing the left interior surface and the right interior surface to that ashley gray. Well, now I want to look at the 2D components because I'm looking down in 2D. So my 2D core, my left side, my right side, and my exterior. They all have different lines to denote where is the core, the stud portion of the wall, the exterior surface. What we want to look at specifically is this solid fill. When this is checked enabled, that means the walls are going to darken in for me when I turn on my solid fill option. And the color that they're going to fill in with is right here. You might have various colors set to that. I know various lumber yards set those colors to different colors so when they're looking at one wall type versus another, they can see that their exterior walls are dark blue. Interior non-load bearing walls, they might make a light yellow. So as they're looking through the floor plan, they can all have different colors. You can do that as well. It doesn't have to be just darkened in black ink. They can all have different colors, every wall, so that when you're looking at a client, you can say, okay, see this wall here? It's dark and it's black. That's a new wall. But maybe if it's yellow, it's going to be a demolished wall, a wall that you're going to take down so they can see. See that yellow wall? It's going to be demolished. Or see this bright green wall? That's an existing wall that's already part of your floor plan, so they can see the difference between new, existing, and demolished work. So solid fill is going to darken in the walls in whatever color that you set here. To change the color, you just click on that swatch of color there. You can see my cursor now looks like a hand, and it'll pull up our color dialog box where you can choose any new color that you want. So again, every wall can have its own color. So I'll just select the black and keep it at the black and click OK. You might have those selected, but your walls still aren't darkened in. They still have that nice line work that you would use for a blueprint of your working drawings when you want to print out the actual working drawings, not presentations for these walls. To get them to darken in, you come up here to the Settings pull-down menu, and under the Settings pull-down menu, you're going to choose Program Settings. Okay, so Settings, Program Settings. In the Program Settings dialog box, you're going to go on the left-hand side to Building Aids. These are little utilities that can change the look and the appearance and how it draws and inserts things in your models. The one that we very specifically want to look at is this one right here, Enable Solid Filling. When that's checked, it'll look at the properties of a wall, and if the wall itself has black ink, blue ink, yellow ink checked as a solid fill option, it'll automatically apply it to that wall, and you get that darkened in look. If this is unchecked, you get the single line appearance of your walls, more in line with a working drawing, not a presentation drawing. So when you're doing your presentation drawings, you come in here and you check this, and when you're done the presentation drawings, you leave it unchecked. So I'm just going to click OK here, and we've got this darkened in floor plan look. So before you go and start creating your presentation drawings and inserting them onto sheets, make sure you take advantage of the tools that I just showed you. The Room Dimensions tool, because it's only available here in your model space. And you might want to insert your text here, but you can do that as well out on your working drawing sheet. And then make sure you have the solid fill checked. Then you're going to go to your worksheets to start inserting views of this model onto your worksheets so you can present them to a client. Looking down to the bottom of my screen, we have been working exclusively in this model space to produce this model and get everything set the way we want it. When we're done working with the model and we want to start printing out those drawings, that's when we start coming to these worksheets that you see here. Mine are called 1 floor plan, 2 elevations, 3 details, 4 site plan. You might just have one worksheet there, and it might be just called worksheet. Coming into these worksheets, it's taking you into an entirely different mode of the software. Instead of producing a 3D model, you're now taking views of that model to print it out. So I'm going to slip to this first sheet called 1 floor plan. Out here, you can insert a title block, and on the title block, you can then insert views of your model to print out. So here on our screen right now, I have a 24 by 36 inch piece of paper. And on this 24 by 36 inch piece of paper, I'm going to insert our presentation drawings. I'm going to insert a floor plan. I'm going to insert a JPEG of that rendering that we produced, and I'm going to insert various 3D views as well. To insert a view of our model, we come to this button right here called Define the Smart View. This Define Smart View button will take a view of our model, allow us to tell it exactly what we want to view, and then insert it onto this working drawing sheet. Before you can insert a view, you have to define it. So you choose Define Smart View. When you choose the Define Smart View option, the Insert View dialog box is going to appear. It'll have options for the type of view you want to produce here on the left, and on the right, it gives you a preview of what you're about to insert. What you see in that preview is exactly what's going to be inserted onto your sheet. So if you're zoomed in really close, and I'm going to pretend that this magenta line that I'm creating is the extent of the inserted view, anything outside that magenta will be discarded. It won't even know it's there when it goes to insert the view. So you might want to zoom out to make sure you got everything, or you might want to zoom in. What if I've got the view that I want to see, but there's extra elements that I don't want to include? I don't want to include the landscaping trees. I don't want to include the sidewalk. I can see lightly ghosted my second floor and my foundation because all the views and all the locations were visible in my model before I came in here to my Insert View dialog box. So if I want to get rid of some of them, that's when I take advantage of this eye right here. It allows me to filter things out that I don't want to see and I don't want to print out as part of my floor plan. So I'm going to click on that little view filter, that little eye button. When I do that, the View Filter dialog box appears, and it allows me to turn off and on the visibility of various elements by shutting down the eye. So if I don't want to see the dashed outline of my ceilings, I can turn that off, and same with my floors. You want to simplify your view for presentation views. The first thing that you'd want to do, though, is make sure that you don't have all locations visible in inserting. All I want is my ground floor. I want all other locations to be turned off. So I uncheck the All Locations option. And then I click on the locations that I don't want to appear, like my foundation. So I'm highlighted on the foundation location right now. And then I click on this button called Display None. So nothing in my foundation location is going to be displayed. Display None. Look at all the eyes to the left. They all close. You might be on a screen delay, so if you don't see them closing, your screen will catch up depending on your internet speed, and you will see those close. Then I would click on my next location, like my second floor. I don't want anything on my second floor being visible either, so I'm clicking on my second floor. And I do the exact same thing, Display None. And all the eyes on my second floor will close as well. So now when I look at my ground floor location, I'll have a combination of eyes open and eyes closed and some eyes half opened. So I will go through and I'll shut the eyes of the things that I don't want to see. So if I don't need to see the lighting or any interior accessories, or maybe you wanted them in there if you had some furniture in, individual members, I can get rid of those. So just turn on and off the visibility of things you don't want to see. A half-opened eye means that that's a group. So roofs, floors, footings, and walls are all groups. In roofs, maybe I want to see the surface, but I don't want to see the framing. Or maybe I don't want to see the roof at all, so I could shut down everything about the roof. So when you see a half-opened eye, that means it's part of a group. Some of the things in that group are turned on in their visibility still. Some of them are turned off. So you can come through here and turn on and off the visibility of the different things you want to see and you don't want to see. And then you simply click OK in this View Filter dialog box, and it would turn them off. Now, before I click OK, I also want to point out that there's different tabs up here. These are elements on the location, so anything a part of my model. Things like trees and paths and paths and driveways are elements on terrain. So you want to visit that tab too if you don't want your terrain elements to show, and hit Display None to shut all of those eyes. If you have text that you don't want to appear or dimensions that you don't want to appear, that's when you would click on the Notation tab. And beside the Notation tab, you could shut down things you don't want to see, text or drafting or different things you don't want. Okay? Click OK, and the view will update. Zooming in and out here does not change the scale of the view that you're inserting. It just makes it easier for you to see. But again, remember, what you see here is what's going to insert. So if I zoom in just on my dining room and have this view, that is exactly what's going to insert. So make sure you zoom out far enough so you see the entire floor plan if that's what you want to see. When you have the view on your screen that you want to see, then look to the left. Make sure you have the scale. the appropriate scale for inserting this view on the size of sheet that you want to print out. If I wanted to print this out at 1/4 inch equals a foot, and this was a large model, I might not be able to fit it on an 11 by 17 piece of paper. I might have to change the scale by clicking here and reduce the scale. If 11 by 17 is the paper size that I need to use, I have to use, but the floor plan is just too large to print out at that scale, then you need to bring it down to maybe an 1/8 inch scale or a 3/16 scale. Or you can even use a user-defined and customize the scale. So make sure you pick the scale here that's appropriate for printing out the view that you want to fit on that particular drawing sheet. Also important before I insert this view onto my sheet is to look here at the insertion options where we have image and drawing. So you can see here I have image and drawing beside the word insert. By clicking on insert, that'll insert this view onto my drawing sheet. But before I do that, I want to review the difference between inserting this as a drawing and inserting this as an image. If I have image checked and that's where the radio is going to be, that means it's going to look at the view that I have in this preview dialog box, and it's going to recreate it out on my worksheet by creating little pixels of color. So that's what you would use if you had a photograph. Photographs are made up on your screen or when they go to print them by tiny little pixels of color, very close together, so it gives you the appearance of black or a red line or a blue sink. So tiny little pixels of blue are all together there to create that image of the sink. That is an excellent way to insert 3D images where you're going to want to show the materials that you're going to be using. That gray paint, that siding, that tiled floor. They have to go in as images to show them as pixels. And that's what we refer to as, if you want to get into the technical term, as a raster image. Images that are made up of tiny little pixels to show the exact colors. When you're working with floor plans, elevations, details, where you're drawing lines to represent those elements, that's when you want to set it to be a drawing. Because a drawing doesn't look at the overall view and create it with little pixels. It recreates the view by drawing an actual line or a circle. And that's what we call a vector image. So vector recognizes lines, circles, arcs, and it recreates that image by recreating those lines. So it is a very crisp view of a floor plan, a section, or a detail. So when you're creating those presentation floor plans, make sure you set it to drawing. So I'm setting mine to drawing. The little dot is beside drawing. And then I simply click Insert. A copy of my presentation floor plan attaches itself to my cursor, and I left-click to place it onto that drawing sheet. I could print it out from there. I wouldn't have to do anything further. I might want to add more drawings onto this sheet. So I might want to add some 3D views or some elevational views. So it's a nice presentation sales sheet. To add another sheet, I would go back up to that Define Smart View button, the same one we used to insert that floor plan. We are defining another view of your model to insert onto the sheet to print out. So I'm going to define Smart View. Again, that Insert View dialog box is going to appear. This time, I'm going to tell it that I want a 3D view. So I'm going to go to the 3D button, and I'm going to tell it that I want this exterior shot. You can see on this 3D view, over to the left-hand side here, I can change my camera height. If I wanted my camera to be sitting up a little higher, or my target where it's looking down on to be, I can move them up and down. So by changing this camera height, your camera could be sitting right now, I think it's sitting at 9 foot. You could have the camera sitting here and looking up to 10 feet, so it's looking up here. So it'll adjust the image and how you're looking at the model. So you can make those adjustments. You also have your navigational tools at the bottom here, just like when we were in that rendering window. So if I want to walk closer to the house, or I want to slightly spin, I can take advantage of these navigational views and spin the image before I insert it. Then all I have to do is hit the Insert button. Take note at my insertion options. See how I don't have the drawing option available? That's because it's using pixels. It has to for colors. It has to show that green grass. And to show that green grass, it needs to use individual green pixels on my screen to reproduce it. It can't use a line. It has to use pixels of color to reproduce those materials, that siding, that grass, that bright yellow door. All has to be part of that. So I hit the Insert button, and a copy of that image attaches itself to my cursor, and I place it on my drawing sheet. I'll put it right below. But what if I created a photorealistic rendering? That view, that 3D view that I just put in, hasn't been rendered, so it's going to have jagged edges. It's not going to have shades and shadows being inserted. It's just a quick 3D visual that you might want to quickly produce to get a drawing out the door. But if you have taken the time to create a photorealistic image, that's when you're going to want to insert an image file. And I'm just circling around a tool right now, and this tool is called Insert an Image. It allows you to look out on your hard drive for JPEG, bitmap, and target image files that you might want to insert as part of your file. So this could be a rendering that you created. This could be your company logo. This could be a picture of the actual home if it was a renovation project that you were working. So you could bring in a before image that you would want to include as part of these presentation drawings. But they have to be in JPEG, bitmap, or Targa format. And again, remember the preference is always for JPEGs, so it keeps your file sizes smaller. So I'm going to click on that Insert an Image File. And when I click on that Insert an Image File, it wants me to look out onto my hard drive to find a image file that I want to insert, JPEG or a Targa or a bitmap. So I've found out on my hard drive this presentation webinar sample rendering. And I'm going to click Open. So this is the same one I showed you that had that little bit of noise. And I click Open. A copy of that comes into this dialog box, so I get to preview it to see it. And I've got different options here. So I could, even if I had chosen the wrong image, I can click on this Browse button here up at the top where it's showing me what file I selected and pick a different image file. So if you have quite a few copies of a picture and you want to rifle through them, this would be a way that you could bring up one and then the next. Then you can change the scale. How big is this image that you're bringing in? You can, right now it's going to bring it in at 1/4 inch equals a foot, which is 1:48. You can see the width and the height here is 125 feet by 94 feet. It's going to produce that big size there. So I can bring this down, and I'm going to tell it that I only want it at 24, 1:24, at an 1/8 inch scale. If I didn't want to bring in the whole image, right now it's showing me that entire image. Maybe I wanted to crop just around the island. Maybe that's the work I wanted to feature. I could create a crop box by using this Set Crop Box option. It allows me to draw a box, this blue box. Whatever is inside the box will be inserted. Whatever outside of it will all be disregarded. You won't see anything outside of that box when it goes to insert it. So you can crop around a larger image if you want to, or you can clear all that. I'm clearing my crop box. I want the whole image. The last thing that you can do before inserting the image is dim the image if you wanted to. So if you wanted it to look dim, you can see mine's right now set to 30%. It's got that dim look. But if I bring that right to 0, it gives that nice, crisp, original picture feel to it of that image when we first produced that rendering. You might want to crop it if you want to overlay this on top of another image that's there. If you give it a dimmed effect, you could put this picture over top of maybe of an existing kitchen picture and show the differences between the two. So you can play with the dimming and crop it down. Then all there's left to do is hit Insert, And a copy of that image attaches to your cursor, and you can left-click to place it onto the drawing screen. What if you wanted it significantly smaller? So I brought it in at 1:24, but what if I wanted it even smaller? Now that it's inserted, I can still change it. I'm going to left-click on that image. When I left-click on it, you'll notice, if you look closely, that there's a blue triangle and a blue square in the middle of it. This blue square, if I put my cursor close to it, allows me to move it up or down the sheet. The triangle allows me to rotate it if I wanted to put it on an angle. But I know I have it selected when I see those two appear. Now that they're selected, I'm going to come to the Modify pull-down menu, and I'm going to choose Scale. So Modify Scale will allow me to scale this image. So I'm choosing Scale, and I'm going to pick right in the middle of that image, because looking down the lower left-hand corner of my screen, you can see that it's prompting me right now to pick first point. If you don't see that yet, you're on a slight screen delay, and it will catch up to you. But down in the lower left-hand corner right now, it's prompting me to pick my first point. So I'm picking a point right in the middle of my image. Now a dialog box is going to pop up and want to know how I want to scale this image. I'm going to tell it that I want it to be 0.5. So I want it to be half the size that it is right now. If I wanted it to be half as large again, I would choose 1.5. So I'm scaling it down to be half the size that it is, so I type in 0.5. And then I simply click OK, and the image is reduced to half the image size that it was. And again, I can pick it up, and I can move it to anywhere that I might want it to be sitting. Maybe I'll move this other one as well, so it's sitting directly below it. Now these are sitting on a 24 by 36 piece of paper. What if you have only the ability to print out 11 by 17s or 8.5 by 11s? How can I get a title block in there to fit around just that portion? I'm going to show you this one last tool today before we break into a question and answer period of inserting a file that's a drawing file. It could be a DWG file. So how can I insert a DWG file that allow me to bring in a title block? Because we have title blocks with the software that is loaded with the software when you first loaded your Envisioneer that came with it, that are in different sizes of title blocks. So I'm picking on that button, and it brings me to the Open dialog box. And here you'll see I've got a title blocks folder. By double-clicking on that title blocks folder, it'll bring in all of my different sizes of title blocks that I have available. And I'm going to tell it that I want to use a B1 size landscape size of title block. That'll give me an 11 by 17 title block. And then I click Open. It'll give me a preview of what that title block is going to look like. And then I can scale it, I can dim it, I can crop around it. So you still have those same abilities that you had when you're bringing in an image, because the same import tool could be in a way that you could bring in different files. If you wanted to bring in a detail that was originally drawn in AutoCAD, you could bring in that detail the same manner. So that's why you have all of those different tools on the left-hand side that allow you to scale it, dim it, or crop it. But if you're using our default title blocks, you don't have to worry about doing that. If you keep it on a 1/4 inch equals a foot, and I click Insert, the title blocks have strings of text attached to them that you can update as you insert them. So if you wanted to put in the current address, the project name, the client name, the drawing name, you can update all of those. And then when you click OK, a copy of that title block will attach itself to your cursor. See what I meant? That certain sizes of title blocks are only appropriate for certain scales of drawings. I can fit in my presentation drawing, the floor plan, quite nicely in here, but it doesn't leave room for the image files. I would have to, I'm just going to move this title block to one side here. I'd have to reduce them significantly in scale to fit them on. So I'd have to come up to Modify, Scale, scale it from the center, and I'd have to bring it down at least half, if not a 1/4 the size of what it is, so that it fits itself onto the sheet to print it out. So when you're looking at creating an 11 by 17, you might have to scale the image files or insert a view of that floor plan again at a different scale. We brought it in originally at a 1/4 inch scale, this floor plan. You might want to reinsert it, redefine a smart view, bringing it in at an 1/8 inch scale. But by changing the sizes of these images, then I could print out just this 11 by 17, not the full 24 by 36. What I'd like to do now is open up our chat panel. In the GoToMeeting console, that right little column on your screen, you have the ability to ask questions. So if you have any questions about presentation drawings in Envisioneer 9, please post them now, and I'll be able to answer those live during our presentation now. We'll save the last few minutes for answering your particular questions that you might have about presentations. Again, tomorrow's class is going to be on precision, and then we also have one on other topics for Wednesday as well. So if you have questions outside of presentation, you might want to hold them for tomorrow, and you'll be able to answer them at that time. And also, coming on later today, we will be sending you out links about your copy of Envisioneer and how you can get your version 9, because it is shipping today. You'll be able to download it. Just remembering that we are staggering the emails going out, so it's going to be sometime today. You might get it right away. You might already have an email waiting for you in your email program with your download ready already. But tomorrow's class, again, is going to be on productivity. We're going to be talking about creating templates. What's in a drawing template? Every time you start up Envisioneer, it always has the same look and feel. How can you modify your own templates? And what information is saved in a template? How can I change my drawing scales? And how can I print out to different scales? How can I create my own title blocks and borders and add text to them? Adding strings of text called attributes that will automatically update every time I put in that title block. And we'll talk about layers and line types and line weights and how we can set up different ones as well, and then how to print that out. On Wednesday, we're going to be talking about precision. So when we're using the software, maybe for framing and estimating purposes, how we can add our own groups and elements, how we can quantify and use phase and usages, those two terms, how we can take advantage of those two terms and understanding what they are, how we can create assemblies, and assemblies are a way of adding different materials to an object to quantify them, how we can build our own formulas, how we can define framing and different infills and members. So all classes this week, great way of learning new things about version 9 and understanding all different aspects of the software and how you can take advantage of them. So I'm just going to go to my question and answer poll right now. And our first question is, how would we print this presentation to scale? Every time you're working in our software, understand that you're working in a scaled environment. And the scale is found under this View pull-down menu and by going to View Properties. So you have View Properties, and I'm going to hold there because I know there might be a slight screen delay for some people. So under the View pull-down menu, you're going to go to View Properties. In the View Properties dialog box, it tells you what the current view is, scale. So right now, my View Properties tell me that on this sheet, one floor plan, the scale is 1/4 inch equals a foot. So if I'm going to print this out, and I want to print to scale, I have to respect that this whole sheet was set up in a 1/4 inch equals a foot environment. It doesn't matter if I insert a view at a reduced scale. So if I inserted that floor plan and I brought it in at an 1/8 inch scale, the entire environment out here is 1/4 inch. So when I go to print it out, it's recognizing this title block is at 1/4 inch equals a foot. Views that are inserted on that title block may be 1/2 inch, maybe 1/8 inch, maybe at a 3/16 scale. But the title block itself, and to print it out to scale, is at 1/4 inch equals a foot. So when I come now to File, and Print. And I want to print that to scale. I'm going to choose that I'm going to go to a PDF, so I'm choosing my PDF writer. And I want to tell it that I'm going to be going to an Arch B piece of paper, because that's the size of paper that we had chosen for that title block. Arch B. The most important thing that you can remember is this print area. Really, really important. Picking your paper size, of course, is important, but the print area. When I choose all extents, it's everything that it can see out on my drawing screen at that particular time. That's the extent that it can see. So if there's something off in space out here that you can't currently see, it's part of the extent of that view, and it'll try to pick it up, and it will zoom out to that and print to it. You also have the option here for printing to just what's inside that preview window. Or you have window. And I like to use the window option exclusively. I don't use any other option when I go to print. I always set it to window. Because by setting it to window, I can window around just what I want to print. Not depending on display or not depending on the extents that might be out past what I can see at the current time. I'm going to very specifically window around what I want to print. So you can see when I choose the window option, I get this window button. By clicking on that window button, it takes me back out to my drawing area and allows me to pick around a window of what I want to print. So I'm just left-clicking and windowing around the title block. Left-click, left-click. You'll notice out around all of our title blocks, and I'm just going to circle around it, we have these little L-shaped options on either side of the title block. That is your print pick point for window. So it'll leave a little bit of white space between your title block and the edge of the paper. So if you pick points with your windows from that point there to the other corner where it's got that same edge, you'll have a nice printed view. The next thing you want to do then is make sure that you then set it to print to scale. So when it prints it to scale, it's going to recognize the scale that you've set for that drawing environment for my one floor plan sheet, see that it's a 1/4 inch, and print that 11 by 17 out at a 1/4 inch. And see how everything nicely fits in? What if I don't want it to print to scale? What if I quickly need to get a drawing out? I just want it to fit on the page. I know I don't have an 11 by 17 border in. I've got the 24 by 36. I just need to print. That's when you can tell it to just fit it to the page. So it will fit this down to my 8.5 by 11 if I'm going to print to an 8.5 by 11. And it'll just make everything that's on that drawing screen fit to an 8.5 by 11. It will not be to scale. It's fitting it best that it can to fit on that page. But if you want it to be to scale, you have to print it to scale. And make sure that that drawing is small enough to fit on that size of paper and print out. And then I would just hit print, and I'd have my 11 by 17 paper with my scaled floor plan and image files. I've noticed CADSoft has renderings that fade from real view to a line drawing in the same image, or from a rendered view to a frame view. How did you do that? That's when we can take, and we have those different files. You'll notice it maybe on our home page, and I might just scoot up to our website right now so that you can see it. And I'm just going to go back a file here and try to find an image that you're talking about so I can give you a good indication for everybody what we're looking for here. Okay, so here's one I've got on the screen right now. And you can see that it was sitting there on that file. I'm just going to go back to it here and pause the screen so it doesn't try to go back here, picking on that file. And I'm just going to pause the screen on this particular image. So on this image that you see here, we've got a rendered image, and then they've got the fades to framing on the side here. How was that accomplished? We took the rendered image that we created in Envisioneer, and we took a framed image that we created in Envisioneer. And in software like Photoshop, you can put the two together. You can't put the two together in Envisioneer. You can either produce a rendering or produce a framing file, but in photo editing software like Photoshop, you can put the two together. If you want to see a gallery of different images that we've created only in Envisioneer and not went to Photoshop or anything like that, then hit our gallery, and I'm just going to circle around it here. This gallery will show you images created in the software strictly in Envisioneer, all the renderings in here, where they haven't had any production files created by going to something like a Photoshop. Okay, so you can look at that gallery here, and in the gallery you can look at all the different renderings, and those are strictly produced in the software. Next question. Does the wall infill insert a wall color legend to define colored walls? There isn't a legend that automatically is produced. So as we were talking about the solid fill and how it can have different colors set to it, it won't automatically produce a legend, but you could produce that yourself. You could, using draw lines in our working drawing sheets here, draw lines to create a table, and then insert a picture of one wall and then the next wall, and then beside it, by using tools text, type out what it is. So it won't automatically create a legend, but you have the tools here to do that yourself by lines, text, and inserting those defined views of certain walls. Okay, and that seems to be all the questions that I have so far. I'm going to keep that chat panel open for one more minute just in case someone has a question that they haven't produced up there yet, and I'll be able to answer it. But I just want to remind everybody that we did tape today's broadcast, and we will be sending a link so you can download the presentation and you can watch it again to review all the information that I did cover, because there was a lot of information that we did go through today. And following today's presentation, I'll also be sending you a booklet so you can read about all the terms and definitions that I went over today, where to find all those particular tools again, so you can step yourself through it as you look at your own models. And I'm just going to see, there doesn't seem to be, oh, there is another question right there. The installation of version 9, does it require the uninstallation of previous versions? No, it does not, and that's very handy. So what I recommend you do is keep on your version 8, keep it on your system. You're going to get the link from us today for version 9. Download, install version 9. When you get version 9 installed, you can then take any customized files that you had in your version 8 and copy them over to version 9. And I want to use that word, with extra emphasis, copy. Don't move them over, because you want to make sure that your version 9 is functioning before you get rid of your version 8. And if you just move them over, version 8 doesn't have them anymore. And by bringing them over to version 9, it'll take them into an upgrade process where they'll only be able to use in version 9. So make sure you copy them over, so you keep a copy in your version 8 and in your version 9. Up on our forum, I'm going to be posting up instructions, and on our website, you will find instructions on what to keep when you're doing your upgrading process. So I'm taking you back to our website right now, www.cadsoft.com. There you'll see we have our support tab. By clicking on support, down the lower right-hand corner, so I picked on support, and now I'm going to be picking on reference materials. If you've never visited this portion of our website before, I strongly recommend that you do. There's some great reading materials and videos to watch there. And if you click on reference materials, here you'll find all different documents that we've written on different subjects. The one that's the most important during the upgrade process is this one right here, saving customized files before you uninstall. So if you customized your catalog, maybe added new materials, new wall items, you'll want to make sure you read that document before you do that. It's a very important document about what to save. Once you've read the document, you've installed your 9, make sure that 9 is functioning with all your customized files before you uninstall version 8. So yes, they can run side by side. Can we use version 8 over 9 even though 9 is installed? Yes, you can use version 8. Make sure you've got everything running with your version 9. Continue using your 8 until 9 is all upgraded and done, and then switch over to 9. But when you start using 9, remembering that the files you open up in 9 become a version 9 file. They won't automatically open up in version 8 because it's an older file. If you want to bring them back down to a version 8, you can do a file and a save as, and one of the save as options are there is save as a different file type. So if you come to File, Save As, you can save it as a version 8 drawing. But you have to come into this dialog box, File, Save As, to do that and tell it that you want it to be a version 8.2 document and not just a 9, because then it won't be able to be opened up in 8 again. But once you have 9 functioning, you won't want 8 anymore. You want to continue on with it. But during that whole process, just make sure that you do make sure it's running perfectly first. Okay, that seems to wrap up all of our questions. So I will make sure that you get your version 9 upgrade today. It could be as late as tonight that it arrives to you because they are timing them out so everybody's not up on the server at the same time. And I look forward to everybody in your presentation tomorrow, but you will receive right now an email from me with documents that cover the information from today. Thanks, everybody. I hope you have a great week. Bye-bye.